The cafe was the kind of place that felt forgotten by time. Dim yellow bulbs, mismatched chairs, the low hum of an old refrigerator behind the counter. Outside, rain traced thin uneven lines down the glass, blurring the streetlights into soft halos. It was late enough that the after-work crowd had vanished, leaving behind only the smell of coffee grounds and something faintly sweet, like cinnamon. Aisha sat across from Daniel, both hands wrapped around her mug even though she'd already finished most of it. The warmth was comforting, grounding. She hadn't expected the evening to stretch this long. What was meant to be a quick coffee had slowly turned into something else, stories layered on stories, laughter slipping in where she least expected it, silences that didn't demand to be filled. Daniel watched her in a way that made her feel seen rather than studied. Not the quick, distracted glances she was used to, but a steady attention, as if he was listening even when she wasn't speaking. He traced the rim of his cup with one finger, then leaned back slightly, exhaling through a half-smile. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You've been asking me things all night. This one's different." That alone made her shoulders tense. Aisha had learned to read the signs, when curiosity turned into judgment, when interest tipped into expectation. She nodded anyway. "Okay." Daniel hesitated, gaze drifting briefly toward the rain-streaked window before returning to her. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," he added quietly. That made her pause. Men rarely said that and meant it. "Go on," she said. He didn't rush it. "Why are you still a virgin at 28? The word landed softly, but it still echoed. Aisha felt it settle in her chest, heavy with all the assumptions people usually packed around. Naive, sheltered, too religious, too scared, broken in some quiet, embarrassing way. For a split second she considered deflecting with humor. She was good at that. But something about the way Daniel asked, no smirk, no challenge, made her still. She looked down at her hands. Her nails were chipped, the polish a pale, indecisive pink. "Most people don't ask that so calmly," she said. "I'm not most people," he replied. Not arrogantly, just matter of fact. She laughed under her breath. "That's obvious." Silence stretched. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the glass with more insistence. Aisha inhaled slowly, then looked up at him again. "Because I didn't want to rush," she said. The words came out simpler than she'd rehearsed them in her head over the years. "Because everyone talks about it like it's a finish line you're late to, or a thing you're supposed to get over with. And that never made sense to me." Daniel didn't interrupt. His expression didn't change, except around the eyes where something softened. "I went on dates," she continued. "I liked people. I even came close a couple of times. But every time it felt like I was agreeing to something just to prove I wasn't behind." She winced slightly at the word. "And I hated that feeling more than I hated being alone." She expected him to nod politely and move on, or worse, to reassure her with something empty. Instead, he leaned forward, forearms resting on the table, giving her his full attention. "So you waited," he said, "not because you were afraid, but because you were selective." "I guess," she shrugged. "I didn't want it to be something I survived. I wanted it to be something I chose." The hum of the cafe seemed to fade for a moment, as if the room itself were listening. Daniel's lips curved into a small, thoughtful smile. "That's rare," he said. She tilted her head. "Rare how?" "Rare that someone trusts themselves enough to wait for their own timing instead of borrowing everyone else's." The comment caught her off guard. Aisha felt heat creep up her neck. Not embarrassment, but something warmer. Validation, maybe, or relief. Most reactions she'd received over the years had fallen into two categories: disbelief or unsolicited advice. "You just haven't met the right person. You'll regret it. Life's too short." No one had ever framed it as trust. "I didn't think of it like that," she admitted. Daniel glanced at her cup. "May I?" She slid it toward him without thinking. He wrapped his hands around it briefly, then pushed it back, as if testing the idea of sharing rather than the drink itself. "I'm glad you told me," he said. "Most people get weird," she replied, "or they make it about themselves." He chuckled. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious. But curiosity doesn't have to be entitled." Aisha held his gaze. "You're not disappointed?" "Why would I be?" She searched his face, looking for the trick. "Some people think it's a burden, like you come with expectations." Daniel shook his head slowly. I think it means you know the value of a moment, that you don't give parts of yourself away just because someone asked. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She took a sip of coffee she didn't need, buying herself a second to steady. Outside, thunder rumbled, distant but deep. Daniel glanced toward the window again, then back to her. "Can I be honest?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "It would be strange if you weren't." "I don't feel like you were waiting for a person," he said. "I think you were waiting for a situation that felt true to who you are." Something in his voice, quiet certainty, not flattery, made her chest ache. She nodded. Yes, exactly that. They sat there for a moment, suspended. The question that could have ended the night had instead opened something. Daniel broke the silence first. "Then whoever that moment is with," he said carefully, "is going to have to meet you where you are. Not rush you. Not define it for you." Aisha felt her pulse quicken. Not because of what he was implying, but because of what he wasn't. There was no pressure hidden beneath his words. No expectation hanging in. The air. She smiled, slow and genuine. "That's the first time anyone's ever said that to me." He returned the smile, softer now. "Seems like the bare minimum." The barista began stacking chairs at the far end of the café, a subtle signal that closing time was near. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle, the storm passing without spectacle. Daniel glanced toward the counter, then back at her. "I don't want the night to end just because the coffee did," he said. "Would you like to walk for a bit?" Aisha looked at the window, at the slick pavement reflecting the city lights. She felt calm, grounded, strangely brave. "Yes," she said. "I would." As they stood and reached for their coats, she realized something quietly profound. The question hadn't diminished her. It had clarified her. And for the first time, sharing that truth felt less like exposure and more like being understood. The air outside felt freshly rinsed, cool and clean against Aisha's skin. The rain had slowed to a soft, intermittent drizzle, the kind that didn't demand an umbrella but made the city shine. Streetlights reflected off the pavement in long, wavering streaks of gold. And somewhere down the block, a car passed slowly, tires whispering over wet asphalt. They walked side by side at first, close enough that their coats brushed now and then. Neither of them rushed to fill the silence. It wasn't empty. It was spacious, like a room with the windows open. Aisha noticed how easily her breathing matched his pace, how natural it felt not to perform, not to explain. Daniel broke the quiet gently. "You know," he said, "most people mistake confidence for loudness." She glanced at him. "And what do you think it actually looks like?" "Like what you did back there," he replied, saying what you wanted without apologizing for it. She laughed softly. It didn't feel very confident. It doesn't have to feel that way to be real. They turned a corner, the cafe now out of sight. The city seemed to narrow around them, buildings rising closer, the night growing more intimate. Aisha became acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from him, the subtle scent of soap and rain. When their hands brushed, neither of them pulled away. By the time they reached her building, the drizzle had stopped altogether. The sky hung low and heavy, clouds drifting apart just enough to reveal a few pale stars. She paused at the entrance, fingers resting on the strap of her bag, suddenly aware that this was a threshold of more than just brick and glass. Daniel stopped with her, not stepping too close. "I don't want to assume anything," he said, "but I'd like to keep talking." "If you do." She studied him for a moment, the quiet sincerity in his eyes. There was no impatience there, no sense of a goal waiting behind his words. Just presence. "I'd like that," she said. "You can come up." The elevator ride was unhurried, almost suspended. They stood opposite each other, hands relaxed at their sides, exchanging small smiles that carried more meaning than conversation. When the doors opened on her floor, Aisha felt a flutter in her chest. Not nerves exactly, but anticipation tempered with calm. Inside her apartment, the lights were low, the space modest but warm. She set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, and glanced back at him. Daniel lingered near the door as if giving her the chance to change her mind. "Make yourself comfortable," she said. He did slowly, slipping out of his coat, taking in the room without intruding on it. They moved toward the couch almost instinctively, sitting with a small space between them. The city hummed faintly through the windows, a distant reminder that the world was still turning. They talked about nothing and everything. Childhood memories, small disappointments, the strange ways people ended up where they did. Time softened around the edges, minutes stretching into something less measurable. At some point, laughter bubbled up between them, easing the last traces of tension. When the laughter faded, the quiet returned, different now. Charged but gentle. Daniel turned toward her. "May I?" he asked, lifting his hand slightly, stopping short of touching her cheek. The question alone made her heart skip. She nodded. His fingers were warm against her skin, his touch unhurried, as if he were memorizing rather than claiming. When he leaned in, it was slow enough that she could have pulled away. Instead, she met him halfway. The kiss was soft at first, exploratory. Not the kind that demanded, but the kind that listened. Aisha felt herself relax into it, the world narrowing to the simple truth of shared breath and closeness. When they parted, it was only by inches, foreheads resting together. "That's nice," she murmured, surprised by her own smile. He chuckled quietly. "It is." They kissed again, a little deeper this time, still unhurried. Each moment felt intentional, chosen. Daniel's hands remained respectful, attentive to her cues, as if he understood that the night was not about how far they went, but how fully they were present. Eventually, they shifted positions, sitting closer, her legs tucked beneath her, his arm resting lightly behind her without pulling her in. The intimacy of it made her chest ache in a way that was almost overwhelming. Not urgency, but fullness. She rested her head against his shoulder. "I was afraid," she admitted softly, "that when it finally happened, whenever it happened, it would feel like pressure. Like I'd waited too long and needed to catch up." Daniel tilted his head, resting his cheek lightly against her hair. "Does it feel like that now?" She considered the question honestly. "No," she said. "It feels quiet, in a good way." He smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Good, then we're doing something right." The hours unfolded without ceremony. They talked, dozed, shared warmth and closeness that felt unforced. At some point, the city outside fell into its deepest silence, the kind that comes just before dawn. The rain began again, softer this time, tapping gently against the windows. Aisha lay awake, aware of the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing beside her. She felt grounded, safe in a way that had nothing to do with walls or locks. This wasn't a moment stolen from herself. It was one she was fully inside. She turned toward him slightly. "You know," she whispered, "people always made waiting sound like a lack." Daniel stirred, eyes opening slowly. "And what does it feel like to you?" She smiled in the dim light. "Like abundance. Like I brought all of myself with me instead of leaving pieces behind." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Then it was worth it. Morning crept in gradually, pale light seeping through the curtains. When Aisha finally slept, it was deeply, peacefully, and when she woke again, the world felt subtly, irrevocably different. Not because something had been taken from her, but because something had been affirmed. Daniel shifted beside her, blinking against the light. He looked at her with the same calm attention as the night before. "Good morning," he said. She smiled, certain in a way she had never been before. "It is. If you like the video, please like, subscribe, and share.